The fluorescent lights of the bus stop flickered as David pulled his jacket tighter against the November wind. It was almost 8 in the evening, and the cold cut through his work clothes like a knife. His boots were caked with dried concrete dust, and every muscle in his body ached from another long day at the construction site. He checked his phone again. The babysitter had texted 20 minutes ago. Sophie and Lucas were asking when he'd be home. He quickly typed back that he'd be there soon, just waiting for the bus. His daughter was 10 now, his son 7. And they were probably watching TV and pestering Mrs. Chen about when they could have their bedtime snack. Being a single dad wasn't easy. It had been 3 years since their mother left, and David had learned to juggle work, school pickups, homework help, and bedtime stories all on his own. Some days he felt like he was drowning, but he always showed up. Always. That's what mattered. The bus stop was mostly empty. A couple of teenagers stood nearby, lost in their phones. An older man sat on the bench, reading a newspaper under the dim light. Everyone was in their own world, waiting for their ride home after a long day. That's when David noticed her. At first, he thought it was just a pile of clothes or bags someone had left behind. But as he looked closer, his heart sank. It was a girl, slumped against the side of the bus shelter. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. Her body was positioned awkwardly, like she didn't have control over how she was sitting. Next to her was a wheelchair, folded up and leaning against the wall. David looked around. The teenagers hadn't noticed. The old man kept reading his paper. Cars drove past without slowing down. Everyone was too busy, too tired, too focused on getting home. He walked over slowly, not wanting to startle her. As he got closer, he could see she was conscious. Her eyes were open, but they looked exhausted and scared. She was trying to say something, but the words came out jumbled and hard to understand. "Hey," David said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The girl's eyes locked onto his, and he could see the relief flood through them. She tried to speak again, her words coming out slow and slurred. It took David a moment to understand, but he realized she was trying to tell him she'd been there for hours. "Hours? You've been here for hours?" David asked, his voice rising with concern. She managed a small nod. Her hand trembled as she tried to reach for something in her jacket pocket. David gently helped her pull out a phone. The screen was black. Dead battery. "Your phone died," he said, more to himself than to her. He looked at the wheelchair, then back at the girl. "Were you supposed to get picked up?" Another nod. More difficult words. David had to lean in close to understand. Something about a doctor's appointment. Something about medical transport that never came. Something about her grandmother, not knowing where she was. David felt anger rise in his chest. Not at the girl, but at the situation. How could someone be left like this? Where was the transportation service? Why hadn't anyone else stopped to help? He pulled out his own phone and checked the time. The last bus on this route would come in 40 minutes. But looking at this girl, David knew she couldn't wait that long. She looked cold, exhausted, and scared out of her mind. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Elena," she managed to say. "Elena, I'm David. Listen, we need to get you home. Can you tell me your grandmother's number? I'll call her." Elena's eyes filled with tears. Whether from relief, or exhaustion, or fear, David couldn't tell. Maybe all three. She slowly recited the numbers, David having to ask her to repeat them twice to make sure he got it right. He dialed. It rang 4 times before an elderly woman's voice answered, speaking quickly in English mixed with Spanish. "Hello. Is this Elena's grandmother?" David asked. The woman's voice immediately shifted to panic. "Elena? Where is Elena? Is she okay? I've been calling the transport company for 3 hours. They said they picked her up, but she never came home." David felt his jaw tighten. "Ma'am, Elena is safe. She's with me at the bus stop on 5th and Broadway." The transport never came. Her phone died, so she couldn't call you. The grandmother's relief came through the phone in a rush of words, half in English, half in Spanish, thanking God and asking who David was and how was her granddaughter really okay. She's cold and tired, but she's okay, David assured her. I'm going to bring her home to you. What's your address? The grandmother gave him an address on the other side of town. David did a quick mental calculation. It would take at least 45 minutes to drive there. Then another 40 minutes back to his own place. The babysitter would charge extra. The kids would be asleep by the time he got home. But looking down at Elena, at her frightened eyes and trembling hands, David didn't hesitate. I'll have her home within an hour, he told the grandmother. He hung up and looked at Elena. Come with me, he said simply. I'll get you home safely. Getting Elena into his truck was harder than he expected. She couldn't support her own weight, and David had to be careful not to hurt her as he lifted her. She was lighter than he thought she'd be, almost fragile. He got her settled in the passenger seat, made sure the seatbelt was secure, then loaded her wheelchair into the truck bed. The teenagers at the bus stop finally looked up from their phones, watching with mild curiosity. The old man nodded at David with approval. David didn't care about any of it. He just wanted to get this girl home. As he started driving, Elena seemed to relax a little. The heat from the truck's vents slowly warmed her up. David kept glancing over to make sure she was okay. You must have been so scared, he said after a few minutes of silence. Elena nodded. She was trying to speak, and David listened carefully. Between her difficulty with words and the emotion in her voice, he understood that this had happened before. Not this bad, but close. Services that didn't show up. People who walked past without stopping. Being stuck somewhere. Unable to move. Unable to call for help. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. He thought about his own kids. What if something happened to them? What if they needed help? And no one stopped. How long have you been living with your grandmother? He asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Elena's response came slowly. 5 years. Since her parents died. Car accident. Same accident that made her condition worse. David felt his chest tighten. This kid had been through so much already. Lost her parents. Living with a disability. Relying on a system that kept failing her. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They drove in silence for a while. The city lights passing by the windows. David called the babysitter to let her know he'd be late. He called his daughter to say goodnight and promise he'd see her in the morning. Elena watched him make these calls. When he hung up, she managed to ask, Your kids? Yeah, David smiled. Sophie and Lucas. 10 and 7. They're probably supposed to be in bed right now. But knowing them, they're sneaking extra TV time. For the first time, Elena smiled. Just a small one. But it was there. They're lucky, she said softly, the words coming clearer now that she'd relaxed a little. Lucky to have you. David didn't know what to say to that. He just kept driving. Taking this girl he'd just met across town to her grandmother. Doing what felt like the only right thing to do. He had no idea that this moment, this simple decision to stop and help, would change everything. The neighborhood where Elena lived was different from David's. The buildings were older, more worn down. Streetlights flickered, or didn't work at all. He could see groups of people sitting on stoops despite the cold, and laundry hung from balconies even in November. Elena directed him with small gestures and one-word directions. Left here, straight, right at the corner. They pulled up to a 3-story apartment building with chipped paint and a cracked front entrance. As soon as David's truck stopped, the building's front door burst open. An elderly woman rushed out, moving faster than someone her age probably should. Her gray hair was pulled back in a bun, and she wore a cleaning company uniform with a cardigan thrown over it. Elena, mi niña, she cried out, reaching the truck before David could even turn off the engine. David got out quickly and opened the passenger door. The grandmother was already there. Her hands on Elena's face, checking her over with tears streaming down her cheeks. She was speaking rapidly in Spanish, words David couldn't understand but whose meaning was crystal clear. Relief, love, fear that had finally released its grip. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" David said gently. "I'm David." We spoke on the phone. The grandmother turned to him, and before he could say anything else, she grabbed his hand with both of hers. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I was so worried. 3 hours I called them. 3 hours they tell me she was picked up, but she never came home. I didn't know what to do. I was about to call the police." "It's okay," David said. "She's safe now. Let me help get her inside." He retrieved the wheelchair from the truck bed and unfolded it. Together, he and the grandmother carefully moved Elena from the truck to the chair. David noticed how practiced the grandmother's movements were, how she knew exactly how to position Elena for comfort and support. This was a routine they'd done thousands of times. Getting into the building was harder than expected. There was a wheelchair ramp, but it was broken. Part of it had separated from the concrete, leaving a gap that made it impossible to use. David ended up having to lift the front of the wheelchair, while the grandmother supported the back, carrying Elena up the 3 steps to the entrance. "It's been broken for 2 months, the grandmother explained, breathing hard from the effort. "The landlord keeps saying he'll fix it. Always mañana. Mañana." They took an old elevator that shuddered and creaked up to the 2nd floor. The grandmother, whose name was Maria, kept thanking David over and over. "Let's not, Anna." And 41. She kept touching Elena's hand, as if making sure she was really there. The apartment was small but incredibly clean. David could see it was probably only 2 bedrooms. The living room had a couch covered with a handmade blanket, a small TV on a stand, and pictures everywhere. Lots of pictures. He noticed photos of a younger Elena, with a man and woman who must have been her parents. Everyone was smiling. Everyone looked happy. Medical equipment was set up in one corner. A specialized cushion. Some kind of supportive device. Medication bottles lined up neatly on a small table. Maria bustled around, getting Elena settled on the couch with pillows positioned just right. She brought a blanket, tucked it around her granddaughter, then hurried to the kitchen. "Please. Sit," she called to David. "I make you coffee. Or tea. Are you hungry? I have some rice and beans I can heat up." "No, really. I'm okay," David said. But Maria was already pulling out a container of food from the refrigerator. "You brought my Elena home. You will eat something. I insist." David sat down carefully on a worn armchair. Elena was watching him with those same tired eyes. But now, there was something else there too. Maybe curiosity. Maybe gratitude. "Your grandmother seems like she really takes care of you," David said. Elena nodded. Her speech was a bit clearer now that she was home and relaxed. "She does everything. Works every day. Takes care of me. I don't know what I'd do without her." Maria returned with a plate of rice and beans that was still warm, and a glass of water. She set it in front of David on the coffee table. "Please, eat." David hadn't realized how hungry he was until the smell hit him. He'd worked through lunch again today, something he did too often. He took a bite. It was delicious. Simple, but made with care. Maria sat down next to Elena, her hand resting on her granddaughter's shoulder. Now that the immediate crisis was over, David could see how exhausted she looked. Her eyes had dark circles underneath. Her hands, resting on her lap, were rough and weathered from work. "How long have you been taking care of Elena?" David asked gently. 5 years now?" Maria said. "Since the accident. Since my son and his wife." She trailed off, her voice catching. "Elena is all I have left. She is my world." Elena reached up and squeezed her grandmother's hand. "The transport company," Maria continued, her voice turning angry. "They are supposed to be reliable. The insurance pays them good money. Well, Maria continued, but 3, 4 times now. They don't show up. Or they come too early and leave. Or they take Elena to the wrong place. I complain. But nothing changes. That's not right, David said. You shouldn't have to worry like that. I know. But what can I do? I have to work. The bills, the medications, the rent. Everything is expensive. And Elena needs to go to her appointments, her physical therapy, her doctor visits. If she misses them, her condition gets worse. David looked around the apartment again. He noticed things he hadn't seen before. The refrigerator that hummed too loud, probably on its last legs. The water stain on the ceiling from a leak. The carpet that was worn down to threads in places. This was a home held together by determination and love. But barely. Where do you work? He asked Maria. I clean offices downtown. Night shift, usually. But I switch to days so I can be here for Elena in the evenings. It pays less. But what choice do I have? And Elena, you're not in regular school? Elena shook her head. I do independent study. It's easier. The school is too far. And getting there every day. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. David felt something twist in his chest. Here was a kid who should be hanging out with friends, going to football games, worrying about homework and crushes and all the normal teenage stuff. Instead, she was trapped by circumstances beyond her control. He finished his food and checked his phone. It was almost 9:30. The babysitter was probably wondering if he'd forgotten about her. I should get going, he said, standing up. My kids are probably thinking I disappeared. Maria walked him to the door. I don't know how to thank you. Really. You are a good man. Not many people would stop. Not many people would care. David felt uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Maria said firmly. No, they wouldn't. I see people every day. They walk past. They look away. You stopped. You cared. That makes you different. She pulled a pen and paper from a drawer near the door and wrote something down. This is my number. Elena's number too. For emergencies. Please. If you ever need anything. If there's ever any way I can help you. David took the paper and put it in his wallet. He wrote his own number down for them. If you have any more trouble with that transport company, call me. I mean it. We've why. Axed right. As he walked back to his truck, David glanced up at the building. The broken ramp. The flickering lights. The general state of disrepair. He thought about Elena. Stuck in that apartment most days. He thought about Maria. Working herself to exhaustion trying to keep everything together. The drive home took 40 minutes. David paid the babysitter the extra money she was owed, apologized for being so late, and locked the door behind her. He checked on Sophie and Lucas. Both were asleep, sprawled out in their beds in positions that looked uncomfortable but somehow worked for kids. He stood in Lucas's doorway for a moment, watching his son sleep. Lucas had his blankets kicked off. His stuffed dinosaur clutched in one hand. So peaceful. So safe. So unaware of how lucky he was to be healthy. To have what he needed. To not worry about whether someone would show up to take him where he needed to go. David pulled the blanket back over his son and kissed his forehead. In his own room, getting ready for bed, David couldn't stop thinking about Elena. About her sitting at that bus stop for hours. About how many times this had probably happened before. About how many times it would probably happen again. He picked up his wallet from the dresser and pulled out the paper with Maria's number on it. He stared at it for a long moment. Tomorrow he'd go back to work. Back to the grind of making ends meet and raising 2 kids alone. Back to his own problems and his own struggles. But something had shifted inside him. Some door had opened that he couldn't close. He put the paper back in his wallet carefully and set his alarm for the morning. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed direction, and so had Elena's. David told himself he was just checking in. That's all. Just a quick phone call on Saturday morning to make sure Elena was doing okay after what happened. Nothing more than that. But when Maria answered and mentioned she needed to go grocery shopping but didn't want to leave Elena alone, David heard himself saying, "I can take you. I'm heading out with my kids anyway." No, that's how it started. One small offer that turned into another, then another. That first Saturday, David loaded Sophie and Lucas into his truck and drove across town. His daughter sat in the back, playing games on her tablet, while Lucas peppered him with questions about where they were going and who they were seeing. "Remember I told you about helping someone the other night?" David explained. "Well, we're going to visit her and her grandmother. They need some help getting groceries." "Is she sick?" Lucas asked, with the blunt curiosity of a 7-year-old. "She has a condition that makes it hard for her to walk," David said carefully. "She uses a wheelchair. But she's really nice, and I think you'll like her." When they arrived at the apartment building, David noticed the broken ramp again. He'd been thinking about it all week. He had tools in his truck. Materials weren't expensive. It wouldn't take more than a couple of hours to fix. Sophie and Lucas were shy at first when they met Elena and Maria, but Elena had a way about her. Despite her difficulty speaking, she smiled warmly at the kids and asked Lucas about the toy car he was holding. Within minutes, Lucas was showing her all the features of his favorite Hot Wheels, and Sophie was sitting next to Elena on the couch, curious about the books stacked on the side table. "You like reading?" Sophie asked. Elena nodded enthusiastically. "Love it. It's what I do most days." "What kind of books?" "Everything. Adventure stories, mysteries, anything that takes me somewhere else." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Me too. I just finished this really good series about a girl who discovers she has magic powers." And just like that, they were talking like old friends. David and Maria went to the grocery store, leaving the kids together. In the store, Maria insisted she didn't need much, but David could see how she calculated every item, putting things back if the total got too high. When she wasn't looking, he added things to the cart. Fresh fruit, some chicken, a carton of milk. Things he noticed were missing from her refrigerator. At the checkout, Maria tried to argue. No, you've done enough already. Maria, please, let me do this." "But why?" David didn't have a good answer for that. Not one that made logical sense, anyway. He just knew it felt right. "Because I can help. And because Elena deserves to have fresh fruit and protein. So do you." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed his hand. "You are a blessing. A true blessing." When they got back to the apartment, the kids were laughing. Lucas had found some toy blocks in a closet, and somehow he and Sophie had gotten Elena involved in building a tower. Elena couldn't physically stack the blocks, but she was directing them where to put each piece, creating an elaborate structure that had all three of them completely absorbed. "Dad, look what we made," Lucas called out. David looked at Elena's face. She was glowing, genuinely happy, in a way that made her look like a completely different person from the scared girl at the bus stop. After they put the groceries away, David made an excuse to go back to his truck. He returned with a toolbox. "What are you doing?" Maria asked. "Fixing that ramp. It's been bothering me all week." "Oh no. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to." It took him 3 hours. Sophie helped by handing him tools, and Lucas kept him company by providing a running commentary on everything David was doing. Elena and Maria watched from the window, Maria shaking her head in disbelief. When David finished, the ramp was solid. Secure. Safe. He tested it with Elena's wheelchair, rolling it up and down, several times to make sure it was smooth. Maria came outside and just stared at it. "I've been asking the landlord for 2 months. Well, now you don't have to ask anymore." Before they left, David noticed something. There were medical appointment cards stuck to Maria's refrigerator with magnets. Physical therapy sessions, doctor visits, specialists, all scheduled during times when Maria would normally be at work. "How do you manage to get Elena to all these appointments?" he asked. Maria sighed. "I take time off. Lose the pay. Sometimes my boss gets angry, but what can I do?" The transport company. After what happened, I don't trust them anymore. David looked at the calendar. There was an appointment on Tuesday afternoon. What time? On Tuesday. On what time? 2 o'clock. The clinic on 7th Street. Why? I'll take her. I can adjust my schedule. David, no. You've already done so much. I'll take her, he repeated firmly. You need to work. I can help with this. And that's how it became a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, David would leave work early, pick up Elena, and drive her to her appointments. Sometimes, Sophie and Lucas came along. Sometimes they stayed with Mrs. Chen, the babysitter. But David was always there for Elena. At the physical therapy clinic, David watched the sessions. He saw how hard Elena worked, how much pain she pushed through, how determined she was to improve, even by the smallest amount. The therapist told him that Elena had been missing too many sessions before, and it had set back her progress. Consistency is everything with physical therapy, the therapist explained. She needs to come regularly. I can already see improvement just from these past few weeks. The kids started asking when they could visit Elena again. Sophie brought books from her school library to share. Lucas made drawings for her. What started as a one-time act of kindness had somehow woven Elena and Maria into the fabric of David's family life. David's co-workers started noticing the changes in his schedule. His boss, a gruff man named Tony, pulled him aside one day. You leaving early a lot lately, David. Everything okay at home? David explained the situation. He expected pushback. Expected to be told that work came first. Instead, Tony just nodded. That's good of you, real good. Just make sure you're keeping up with your hours. Come in earlier if you need to. We'll make it work. It wasn't always easy. There were days when David felt stretched impossibly thin. Days when he'd get home exhausted, still needing to make dinner, help with homework, and get the kids to bed. Days when his own bills piled up, and he wondered if he was being foolish, helping someone else when he had his own family to worry about. But then he'd think about Elena's smile, about how Lucas had started talking about her like she was his sister, about how Sophie had begun doing a school project on disability awareness, about Maria, who looked less exhausted now that she wasn't carrying everything alone. One evening, about 6 weeks after that night at the bus stop, David was at Elena's apartment, helping Maria fix a leaky faucet. The kids were in the living room. Sophie was reading out loud from a book, while Elena and Lucas listened. Maria stood next to David in the kitchen, watching the kids through the doorway. You know what I haven't heard in 5 years? She said quietly. What? Oh, Elena laughing like that. Really laughing. Since the accident, since her parents died, she's been so sad, so quiet. She does her therapy, she does her schoolwork, but there was no joy, no light in her eyes. She turned to look at David. You brought that back. You and your children. You gave her something to look forward to. You made her feel like a normal teenager again. David felt a lump in his throat. She's a great kid. She deserves to be happy. So many people would have just walked past that night, or dropped her off and never thought about her again. But you kept showing up, week after week. Why? David thought about it. Really thought about it. When my wife left, I felt completely alone, like I was drowning and nobody could see it. Then people started showing up. Neighbors, friends, even strangers sometimes. Little things, bringing us dinner, watching the kids for an hour so I could breathe. Those small acts of kindness saved me. He paused, watching Sophie turn the page of the book. I guess I learned that showing up matters, being consistent matters, and maybe Elena and I aren't so different. We're both just trying to get through each day. And it's a lot easier when you know someone's in your corner. Maria wiped her eyes. You're a good man, David. Your children are lucky to have you. And so are we. From the living room, they heard Lucas shout, Do the voice again, Sophie. Do the dragon voice. Sophie launched into an exaggerated dragon voice, that had Elena laughing so hard she could barely breathe. David smiled. Yeah. He was tired. Yeah. His schedule was crazy. Yeah. He had his own problems to deal with. But looking at these three kids laughing together, at the joy on Elena's face, at the peace in Maria's eyes, it was worth every minute. The phone call came at 2 in the morning. David jerked awake, his heart pounding. Nobody calls at 2 in the morning with good news. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. It was Maria. David, I'm so sorry to call so late, but I didn't know who else. Her voice was shaking, tears clear even through the phone. I'm at the hospital. I collapsed at work. They're saying I had a stroke. A small one, they say. But I'm so scared. And Elena is home alone. She can't be alone. She can't. David was already out of bed, pulling on jeans. Which hospital? St. Mary's. But David, you don't have to come. I just need someone to check on Elena. Maybe call Mrs. Chen? See if she can. Maria, I'm coming to the hospital. And I'm bringing Elena with me. She needs to see that you're okay. Give me 40 minutes. He hung up and moved quickly through the house. Sophie and Lucas were sound asleep. He hated to wake Mrs. Chen at this hour. But this was an emergency. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy but instantly alert when he explained the situation. Go, she said. David threw on a shirt and grabbed his keys. His mind was racing. A stroke. Maria was only 72, but she worked too hard, stressed too much, carried too much weight on her shoulders. He should have seen this coming, should have done more to help. Mrs. Chen arrived in her bathrobe and slippers, shooing him out the door. Go. Take care of that girl and her grandmother. We'll be fine here. The drive to Elena's apartment felt like it took forever. The streets were empty at this hour. Just a few late-night workers and the occasional police car. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tight. Please let Maria be okay. Please. He used the key Maria had given him a few weeks earlier, for emergencies just like this. The apartment was dark except for a lamp in the living room. Elena was on the couch, still dressed, her phone clutched in her hand. Her face was streaked with tears. David, she said, her voice breaking. Is she okay? They won't tell me anything. They said she's stable, but I don't know what that means. What if she doesn't come home? What if I lose her too? David knelt down in front of her. Hey, listen to me. She's going to be okay. It was a small stroke, and they caught it early, but she wants to see you, and you want to see her, right? Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. Then let's go. Right now. Getting Elena ready and into the truck took 15 minutes. She was shaking, whether from fear, or cold, or both. David couldn't tell. He wrapped an extra blanket around her and drove carefully through the empty streets to St. Mary's. The hospital at night was a strange place. Too bright, too quiet, with that distinctive smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner. David navigated through the emergency room, explaining to 3 different nurses why he was bringing a teenage girl in at 3 in the morning. Finally, they were led to Maria's room. She was in a bed, hooked up to monitors and an IV, but she was awake. When she saw Elena, she started crying again. Mi niña, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you were alone. David wheeled Elena right up to the bedside. Elena reached out and grabbed her grandmother's hand, holding it tight. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just held hands, both crying, both relieved to see each other. A doctor came in, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes. She explained that Maria had suffered what they called a mild stroke. With medication and rest, she should recover most of her function, but she'd need to stay in the hospital for at least a few days for observation and treatment. And then what? Maria asked, her voice small. I can't take more time off work. I've already missed too much. And Elena needs me. The doctor looked at Elena, then at David. He's my uncle, Elena said quickly, the lie coming smoothly. David didn't correct her. The doctor nodded. Well, you're going to need help at home, Mrs. Rodriguez. At least for a few weeks. Is that something your family can arrange? David didn't hesitate. She'll stay with us. Both of them. When Maria is released. We have room. Problem. Maria started to protest, but David held up his hand. This isn't up for debate. You can't be alone right now, and Elena can't take care of you by herself. You're coming to stay with us until you're back on your feet. That's final. The relief on Maria's face was immediate. But so was the guilt. David, we can't impose like that. You have your own family. Your own life. You're not imposing. Your family now too. Elena squeezed her grandmother's hand. Please, abuela. Say yes. I can't lose you. I can't. Maria looked at her granddaughter, then at David. Finally. She nodded. Okay. But just until I'm better, and I'll find a way to repay you. The only payment I want is for you to rest and get better. David stayed with them until dawn, dozing in an uncomfortable chair while Elena slept with her head resting on her grandmother's bed. When the morning shift nurses came in, David went to the cafeteria and brought back terrible coffee and slightly better breakfast sandwiches. Maria was already looking better, the color returning to her face. The medication was working. She'd be okay. But as David drove Elena back to his house that morning, the reality of what he'd just agreed to started sinking in. His two-bedroom house wasn't big, but he'd make it work. Sophie could share with Lucas for a while. He'd set up the guest room for Elena on the first floor, so she wouldn't have to deal with stairs. When they pulled up to his house, Mrs. Chen was making breakfast. Sophie and Lucas ran to the door when they heard the truck. Where were you? Lucas asked. Mrs. Chen said it was an emergency. David knelt down to their level. Remember Elena's grandma, Maria? She got sick last night and had to go to the hospital. She's going to be okay, but she needs to rest. So, Elena is going to stay with us for a while, and when Maria gets out of the hospital, she'll stay here too until she's feeling better. Like a sleepover? Lucas asked, his eyes lighting up. Kind of like a really long sleepover, yeah. Sophie looked at Elena in the truck. Is she scared? Yeah, she's pretty scared. Then we should make her feel welcome. Come on, Lucas. Let's get her room ready. The kids ran back inside, already making plans. Mrs. Chen just smiled at David and patted his shoulder. You're doing a good thing. Those kids of yours are learning what real kindness looks like. The next few days were chaos. David took emergency family leave from work, something he'd been saving for when one of his own kids got sick. He brought Elena to visit Maria at the hospital every day. He rearranged his house, moving furniture to make everything accessible for Elena's wheelchair. He coordinated with Maria's landlord to keep her apartment safe while she was gone. His co-workers at the construction site heard about what happened. Tony, his boss, showed up at David's house one evening with his crew. What are you doing here? David asked, confused. You're taking care of that girl and her grandma, right? Making room for them? Tony said. Well, my guys and I, we got to talking. We want to help. Help how? We're going to build you a ramp, a proper one, for your front entrance, and we're going to make some modifications inside. Widen some doorways, make the bathroom more accessible. We'll do it this weekend. No charge. David felt his throat tighten. Tony, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. We're offering. You've been working with us for 6 years, David. You're a good man. You show up every day. You work hard. You help people. Let us help you for once. That Saturday, David's front yard turned into a construction zone. Tony and 5 other guys from the crew showed up with materials and tools. Sophie and Lucas watched in amazement as the men worked, building a ramp that was even better than the one David had made at Maria's apartment. Neighbors came out to see what was happening. Mrs. Chen told them the story. By afternoon, people were bringing food. The woman from 3 houses down brought fresh tamales. The couple across the street brought a casserole. An elderly man David had only waved at before brought groceries. "I heard about what you're doing," the man said. "Taking in that girl and her grandmother. That's real neighborly. Reminded me that we should all look out for each other more." By Sunday evening, David's house was transformed. The ramp was perfect. The bathroom had grab bars and a shower chair. 2 doorways had been widened. The guest room was set up with everything Elena might need. When David brought Elena to see it, she started crying. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "Why do all these people care?" David thought about it. "Because you matter, Elena. You and your grandmother both matter. And when people see someone who needs help, and they see someone else stepping up to help, it reminds them that they can help too. It spreads." That night, after the kids were in bed, David stood in his newly modified house and realized something. When he'd stopped at that bus stop 2 months ago, he thought he was just helping one person get home safely. He had no idea he was starting something bigger. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness would create a wave that touched so many lives. And the wave was still spreading. Maria would come home from the hospital in 3 days. She'd be weak and need support, but she'd recover. And David's house, which had felt empty since his wife left, suddenly felt full again. Full of purpose, full of love, full of family. 6 months had passed since that cold November night at the bus stop. Spring had arrived, bringing warmth and new beginnings, and David's house had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. Maria had recovered well from her stroke. She still moved a bit slower, still had to take her medications every day. But the fierce determination that had carried her through raising Elena alone had brought her back to health. She'd moved back to her own apartment after 2 months, but the connection between the two families had become permanent. Most evenings, Maria would come over to help with dinner. She'd taught David how to make proper rice and beans, and Sophie had become her eager assistant in the kitchen, learning family recipes that Maria had learned from her own mother decades ago. Lucas would set the table, always making sure to put out 5 plates now instead of 3. Elena's transformation was even more remarkable. The regular physical therapy sessions that David had made sure she never missed had paid off. She had better control of her movements, and her speech had improved significantly. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the light in her eyes, the confidence in her voice, the joy that radiated from her when she laughed. She'd started taking online classes through a proper program now, one that David had helped her apply for. A local therapy clinic had heard about her situation and offered her free sessions twice a week. Her wheelchair had been replaced with a newer model through a donation program that one of Tony's crew members had found. But more than any of that, Elena had something she hadn't had in 5 years. She had hope. One Saturday afternoon in April, David was in the backyard with all the kids. He'd built a small garden area where they were planting vegetables. Sophie was carefully placing tomato seeds in the soil, following the instructions on the packet with intense concentration. Lucas was more interested in the worms they'd found, showing each one to Elena before putting it back in the dirt. Elena sat in her wheelchair at the edge of the garden bed, directing the operation like a general. "Lucas, that's the 3rd time you've shown me that same worm. Put it down and help your sister." "How do you know it's the same worm?" Lucas protested. "Because I'm counting them. Now go help Sophie before she plants all the seeds too deep." David smiled as he worked. This had become their Saturday routine. Garden work, followed by lunch, followed by whatever project or adventure the kids came up with. Sometimes, Maria would join them. Sometimes it was just the 4 of them. But it always felt right. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. He wiped the dirt from his hands and opened it. "Hi. This is Jennifer Park from Channel 7 News. We received a tip about your story with Elena Rodriguez and would love to feature it on our Community Spotlight segment. Would you be interested in talking with us?" David stared at the message. News? How had they even heard about this? He found out later that evening. Mrs. Chen had submitted the story to the local news station. She'd written about how one man's kindness had sparked a whole community to come together, and the news station had loved it. "I hope you're not mad, Mrs. Chen said when she came over that evening. "But people need to hear stories like this. They need to know that good things still happen. That good people still exist. That good people still exist." David wasn't sure how he felt about it. He hadn't done any of this for recognition. But when he talked to Maria and Elena about it, they both encouraged him to say yes. "Maybe it will inspire someone else," Maria said. "Maybe someone else will see a person who needs help and stop instead of walking past." So, David agreed. The following week, a news crew came to his house. They filmed him working in the garden with the kids. They interviewed Maria and Elena. They talked to Tony and some of the construction crew who'd helped build the ramp. They even interviewed Sophie and Lucas. "What did you learn from all of this?" the reporter asked Sophie. His daughter thought about it carefully before answering. "I learned that family isn't just the people you're born with. It's the people who show up for you. And I learned that helping people doesn't have to be huge. Dad didn't do anything really big. He just kept showing up, day after day. That's what made the difference." The reporter turned to Lucas. "I learned that Elena is really good at finding worms," Lucas said seriously. "And that wheelchairs are actually pretty cool. And that my dad is basically a superhero. But don't tell him I said that because he'll get all weird about it." Everyone laughed. David felt his face get hot. When the segment aired the following week, David didn't watch it. He was too embarrassed. But apparently, everyone else in the city did. His phone started ringing off the hook. Old friends he hadn't heard from in years called to say they'd seen it. People from his church reached out. Complete strangers sent messages thanking him for restoring their faith in humanity. A local physical therapy clinic called and offered to provide Elena with free sessions for as long as she needed them. A wheelchair company donated a state-of-the-art electric wheelchair. A community organization set up a small fund to help Maria with expenses. But the most surprising call came from the school district. They'd seen the news story and learned about Elena's situation. They wanted to offer her a spot in their special program at the local high school, with full transportation provided and a dedicated aide to support her. She could actually attend regular classes, be around other kids her age, participate in school activities. When David told Elena about it, she couldn't believe it. "Real school?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Really? They want you to start next fall if you're interested." Elena looked at her grandmother, then at David, then at Sophie and Lucas, who were watching eagerly. Tears started streaming down her face. "I never thought. I didn't think I'd ever get to do normal teenager things." "You're going to do all the normal teenager things," Sophie said firmly. "And I'll help you with your homework. And Lucas will probably annoy you, just like he annoys me. And you'll have to deal with all the drama and the stress and everything else that comes with high school." "I can't wait," Elena said, laughing through her tears. That night, after Maria and Elena had gone home, after Sophie and Lucas were in bed, David sat on his back porch, looking at the garden they'd planted. The seeds hadn't sprouted yet, but they would. Give them time, give them care, and they'd grow into something beautiful. He thought about that night at the bus stop, about how close he'd come to just walking past, about how easy it would have been to assume someone else would help, that it wasn't his problem, that he had enough on his plate already. 3 words had changed everything. "Come with me." Those 3 simple words had brought Elena into his life, had reconnected him with his community, had taught his children lessons about compassion and kindness that no school could teach, had shown him that even when you feel like you're barely keeping your own head above water, you still have something to give. David's phone buzzed again. It was Elena, sending a photo in their group chat. She'd taken a selfie with Sophie and Lucas from earlier that day in the garden. All 3 of them were covered in dirt and grinning like crazy. The caption read, "Best siblings ever." Sophie had already responded with a bunch of heart emojis. Lucas had sent back a picture of a worm. David smiled and added his own message to the thread. "Love you all. See you tomorrow." Because there would be a tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. He'd keep showing up for these kids. For Maria. For this family that had formed in the most unexpected way. The local newspaper wanted to do a follow-up story. They wanted to call him a hero. But David had refused. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who'd stopped at a bus stop and made a choice. A choice to see someone who needed help and not look away. A choice to say, "Come with me," instead of, "Good luck." A choice to keep showing up, even when it was hard, even when he was tired, even when he had his own problems to deal with. The thing about kindness, David had learned, is that it's contagious. When people see it in action, they want to participate. They want to be part of something good. One act of kindness creates 2, which creates 4, which creates 8, spreading outward in ways you can never predict or control. That night at the bus stop, David had just wanted to help one girl get home safely. He had no idea he was starting a movement. He had no idea he was building a family. He had no idea that the simple act of stopping, of caring, of showing up, would change so many lives, including his own. Spring turned to summer. The garden grew. The tomatoes came in heavy and sweet. Sophie started high school and joined the volunteer club. Lucas learned to ride his bike without training wheels, with Elena cheering him on from her wheelchair. Maria's health continued to improve. Elena prepared nervously for her first day at regular school. And David? David kept showing up. Every day. For all of them. Because that's what family does. And on warm evenings, when they all gathered in his backyard for dinner, when the kids laughed, and Maria told stories, and Elena smiled that brilliant smile that lit up her whole face, David would think back to that cold November night, to the choice he almost didn't make, to 3 simple words that changed everything. Come with me. It's amazing what can happen when you do.